Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entry Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. If you're enjoying our content, please take a moment to like and follow the show wherever it is you get your podcasts from. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Yoo, founder and CEO of FinMate AI, the AI powered note taking assistant built specifically for financial advisors. Daniel has a unique blend of deep industry and technical expertise. He spent 7 years advising clients at top firms managing over 800 million in assets. He holds dual degrees in economics, molecular cell biology from UC Berkeley, as well as a master's in applied economics from Johns Hopkins, where he focused on machine learning and asset price prediction. After years in fintech, Daniel launched FinMate AI in 2023 to help advisors automate documentation and supercharge client relationships through purpose built AI. Daniel, it's lovely to have you here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
You have an AI company, and I'm always intrigued
Sure.
to talk with people who have an AI company because everywhere I look at the moment, it's AI. You know, artificial intelligence is
Yes.
building applications and things like Riplet, etc. And I'm always keen to understand the challenges of how you get from idea generation to inception through to making it something that's usable, especially that's usable in the financial industry where there's high sensitivity from clients and companies around touching anything that's artificial intelligence for fear of data leak or inappropriate training of a model, etc. Can you talk me through the idea, some of the challenges you faced, and maybe just bring us on the journey, please?
Sure. So when I launched FinMate, we were the only ones in this space providing note taking for advisors specifically. In my initial design and implementation, we were going for the data minimalist approach, and we still are doing that, where we take as little data as possible from advisors' core systems, as well as full deletion. So we really moved all the way in the direction of as secure as possible. Uh, the interesting part, I think, in terms of challenges, like you mentioned, was there's been a broad spectrum of responses from the industry in terms of, um, let's say, risk appetite, right? And so we have some firms that are very, very conservative in so far as they're trying to build everything in house. So they're not offshoring anything or offboarding anything on the AI space to third party. And then we have the other end of the spectrum where, because they see the business opportunity, they've been kind of uh, going at it with abandon and not really caring about security as much as they should. Of course, they'll never say that, but based on their actions, it's very evident that they're not really thinking through the implications. And so there's been a wide splitting in the market. And so that's been one challenge of people saying one thing and doing another.
You're talking about the dual purpose there. Some companies, putting products to market, but security really isn't bedded into their fabric. Um, can you just bring that to life for me, please?
Sure. I mean, in essence, right, some background for this whole trend in the industry happening right now. The venture capital and private equity market has been sitting on dry powder for a number of years since Corona. And so they haven't really invested in anything because nothing seemed worthy. I've seen a number of funds actually hand back their funding back to their investors because they just couldn't find anything to invest in. And so with the advent of AI, all of a sudden there was this big hype and kickoff when the bubble happened. And so a lot of venture capital and private equity funding started flooding in everywhere, right? Which means that people are spinning up companies left and right and rushing ahead to try to capture the market in a very hot environment, which means some of the less sexy things like security will inevitably fall by the wayside, right? Because the name of the game right now is audience capture, right? Part of the issue, and we can talk about this in a little bit, is the lack of a moat in most AI companies. Um, but that's basically the reason for why everyone is running as if their tail's lit on fire, right? Just because this incredible deluge of funding that's been sitting on the sideline that had been waiting to be deployed has now been deployed. Um, and so that's from the startup new company perspective. From the buyer, kind of the older company perspective, it's uh, that hey, there's pressure in the market for AI adoption, and so some companies have decided to just go with it. Most companies I know are starting to spin up internal AI teams to evaluate, and these internal teams, because they're so new, they don't have the kind of the legacy um, vision for security, stability, things like that. And because they're a new department, they end up running really, really fast. And so that's why I was talking about there's been this split in the market on how to respond to this new technology. Um, yeah,
And I suppose that's interesting, Daniel, because you've got net new, so you've got your startups that were always leaner, they were always faster, but maybe a little bit more reckless. But I also think that you're more established, your vintage companies that have been around for many decades in some cases, almost see this swarm of fear that if they don't enact change that involves AI or generative AI or agentic AI in some form, that they won't exist in the next 5 years. And I think that's where that nature of run fast is creeping into organizations that are not built to go at speed.
yeah.
Would that be your perception also?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've personally been surprised at the speed at which some parts of even the financial industry, which is historically not a very fast-moving industry, has moved in the AI space, right? And they're adopting things that I think are a little, they're adopting tools a little too quickly than what's normative for the industry. And uh, digging into it a little further, it looks like it's kind of the result of new departments being spun up internal to these places and bring in more technical talent, perhaps that have less fear for kind of regulation and things like that.
Speak to me about the regulation space. So obviously, we've got two worlds. You've got Europe that is starting to, I would say, put a level of rigor in the regulatory space, and then you have the US that's almost tearing it back. So, as as a company in the artificial intelligence space, are is America more primed for AI? Is Europe better to work in because the guidelines are clear? What will you
Hmm.
see that is that creating difficulties? Is it creating opportunities?
That's a really good question. For us, we're operating mostly not in Europe because of the additional burden of regulation, especially for a smaller company like ours. It's a little bit harder to make sure that all of the regulatory guidelines are kept. And so right now we're operating mostly in North America as well as some places in Australia, Africa, and things like that. In terms of where it's going, there's obviously always going to be a tug of war between people that would benefit from regulation versus people that don't benefit from regulation, right? And so even internal to the U.S. government and how they're handling it, there's some parts internal to the government that are pushing for complete deregulation, and then there are some parts of the company or of the government pushing for additional layers of regulation. Now, you know, cynically, those might be sinecures for the technologically less inclined. Um, positively, there are kind of necessary guardrails. Not really sure exactly where it lines out, but I think the issue with overregulating at this point in the growth curve is that because AI is making such astronomical leaps and bounds, even still, I think it's hard to lay out a foundation of regulation that makes sense in the light that everything's going to change in 6 months anyway.
And that's how it does feel. It does feel like every 6 weeks at the moment, not 6 months, that things are changing, and it's almost hard to keep ahead of the curve. And I think we've a lot of people who are promoting artificial intelligence, but their driver is profit. It's a sales driven lens, etc.
Oh
And
yeah.
then you have like the Greg Free Hiltons of the world kind of warning people to slow down, and AI could be dangerous. And then I think you just have the companies like yourselves that are looking at tasks that may have been dull or daunting, and you're just going, let's make these easier, let's make these efficient, let's make them accessible to people. So do you think there's varying levels of danger and varying levels of, I suppose, accessibility when it comes to the application of the different types of artificial intelligence?
Oh, of course. I mean, generally when we're talking about security risk, I just thematic or tend to divide data up into three categories, right? Public data, internal data, and then private client data. Um, Public data is anything that's accessible and crawlable on the internet, right? I mean, you don't really need too much security when you're just dealing with that level of data. For company internal data, it depends on how important that is to you to keep it out, right? If it's your company internal secrets, obviously maybe you don't want that leaking out. But if it's just standardized SOPs, maybe it's not that important. And then of course we run into private client information, PCI, PII, and that obviously should have the highest level of security. available. And so really depends on what the application is and what data it's touching and pulling from. I mean, a couple months ago, the big buzzword was RAG, right? Resource augmented generation. So, what are the resources? Where is it being generated? Where is the intermediary data being stored? Right? Is it on-prem inside your internal company servers, or is it off-prem using APIs? Right? And so there's just some things to think through.
When when I talk to a lot of people about artificial intelligence, they always have a couple of concerns that come up over and over again. One of them being hallucinations.
Hmm.
As you've developed FinMate AI, specifically because it's in the financial space, how have you dealt with hallucinations? Do you still think there's a need for human in the loop?
100%. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the reason for the human in the loop step is someone needs to take liability, right? And default, it's going to be the advisor that's going to be taking liability. And so, um, you know, what's interesting is when you're developing a tool, it's understanding when to say no to clients. And one of the places where we said no to clients is people have wanted us to just push notes directly into their CRMs, right? And the reason I push back is, well, you need a human in the loop step to check to see if the notes going into your CRM are legitimate. Otherwise, you're going to just be accepting that the AI is working properly 100% of the time and that you're willing to take the liability for whatever is stored there in case of an audit.
I think the liability piece is actually fascinating because we haven't yet seen too much in the space of liability arising out of artificial intelligence and its consumption. But I suspect we're about to see a lot more. I believe Anthropic is caught up in a potentially large case at the moment, and among others around how they use data to train their systems, etc. And I think
Right.
as private companies start to adopt different tools and come up with creative new use cases and maybe blur the lines a little bit, we may see a lot more in this space. It's I think for me it's definitely a watch item, and I think it's one of those. It's probably one of those areas where legislation or strong frameworks may help.
Hmm.
But as you said, technology is changing so fast. It's hard to know
Right.
what's
Right.
what's going to come next. What do you think we're going to see? So when we in the last 3 years, we've kind of gone from interface generative AI to agentic AI now, ordering your shopping and deleting your production databases in the next day. So what do you think is next on the roadmap?
Yeah, the deleting your production database, I think that's just poor architecturing, right? You don't want to give your AI full control of delete privileges without having a human that loops up there. Um, in terms of B2B, at least, my prediction is that whoever is interfacing at the B2C level will be the one that's going to ultimately be taking liability, right? Because at the end of the day, the buck stops with you as you interface with commercial clients, right? Retail clients. For us as a B2B player, um, this is partially why we enforce human in the loop steps here and there to make sure that people are happy with taking that liability and risk for whatever they're saving ultimately. But historically, I think regulation has favored or lean towards um, putting the pressure on the business to retail client relationship rather than the business to business relationship. Um, so, people say, oh, our lawyer's going away, our CPA is going away. Ultimately, I don't think so because ultimately you need a human to take the liability, and it'll probably end up being the human uh, that takes the liability there.
That kind of makes a lot of sense from a human nature. We want to blame someone, and if it's a machine, it's not as satisfactory. Um, Daniel, when you started FinMate AI, what was the problem you were trying to solve? So obviously you had worked in this sector for a number of years. You must have realized that there was a gap or an opportunity to be had, and you know when if I was to consume FinMate now versus having to do the role 3 or 4 years ago, what's the
Yeah.
difference? What does that give me?
Yeah. So the biggest problem I was trying to solve is for any advisor, right? You know, people go into financial advising to talk to people, help people out. Most people don't go into financial advising to just do admin operational paperwork, right? And it's an unfortunate part of the business, but it must be done because of compliance regulations and things like that. And so for me as well, operating in a pretty large organization with a very high volume of client interactions that are required, the operations part of it was not helping kind of do the business well. And so came up with FinMate because at the time there were still AI note takers out there. This was pre GPT 2, I believe. And so when we first got launched, we were playing around with DaVinci GPT 2.0, if anyone remembers that. And just the output was not good enough for the advisor market. And so that's why I created FinMate, to create output that was good enough to put into your CRMs. And so we can bypass a lot of the admin work so that I could talk to more clients, or ultimately was the idea.
Talk to more clients, bring in more money. So it's creating more efficiency and more money in your pocket at the end of the day. That's
Yep.
it's always a good sales pitch to have, Daniel.
More money in your pocket, but also, again, like I think most advisors don't want to sit in front of a computer, right? They didn't enter the business to, talk to a computer. They entered the business because they want to talk to people. And so I think both on just a personal satisfaction level as well as a business perspective, it was helpful. Um, but yeah, I think an interesting thing that has come up in terms of challenges, like you were asking about in the beginning, is the question of moat, right? And this is a question that every company needs to ask itself. It's like, how do we protect our core business from being too easily copied? And a number of friends in the AI industry, and that's always the question: is with the incredible amount of venture capital, private equity coming in, as well as the open access to a lot of AI tooling, what is stopping um, additional copycats from being just spun up, constantly, weekly, monthly? And yeah, I don't know. Have you heard anything on that front? Struggles about moat?
To me, it kind of comes back to your piece on liability and copyright infringement and having the right patents and all of those legal structures in place to prevent malicious
Mm-hmm.
intent. But
Mm-hmm.
if in Ireland you go to the supermarket, you get a little in Aldi, you get a Mars bar that's not a Mars bar, but it's £2 cheaper or whatever.
Yep.
So like
Yep.
it's very hard. It's very hard to say you stole my idea if it's a slight
Oh yeah.
variation of what you're
Oh
doing.
yeah.
So yeah, I think it's going to get really difficult, and like we saw it very quickly with GPTs when
Oh yeah.
Sam Altman launched a GPT store. I remember I was on it. I think the day it launched, and I created a GPT for writing complaint letters, and boy, that flew. A couple of thousand uses over a period of few
Yes.
months, and I then created one that helped study cybersecurity, and that got about
Mm.
10 downloads. So people like making complaints more than they do studying cybersecurity was my
Oh, of
takeaway
course.
from that. But the point being, is incredibly easy to mimic. There was no value there, so like I think you need to have the ability to create value for your investors, for your customers, etc, and that's always been the case. If you look at Apple and Microsoft, you know Microsoft had the market cornered, but Apple created a value proposition, which was, let's be the cool kids. Here's the fancy devices. It's slicker, it's cooler. It's not as functional. It doesn't do a whole lot, but it's cool. And if you can be part of the club. So yeah, I think technology will find
Mhm.
its own space. But yeah, it's going to be very hard to stop people robbing your idea. And I was listening to Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, and he had a
Mm.
he had a kind of debate on artificial intelligence and is it coming to take our jobs, etc.
Yeah.
And the founder of Riplet was on, and he
Mm.
gave an example of, there was a guy he was aware of that was going on Fiverr,
Mm.
looking for people who wanted to bring an app to life, building
Mm-hmm.
the app in a couple of days on Riplet, and then selling
Mm-hmm.
it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so here's your
Mm-hmm.
business idea. Instead
Yep.
of 50 grand investment, I'm going to charge you 10, and it's cost me,
Right.
500 quid to
Right.
make it. So
Right.
uh, that idea in itself caused a bit of angst in the debate, because one guy said, well, that's theft, you're stealing his idea. He was going, no, that's innovation. I've taken a technology, I've created a new thing, I've made some money in doing it. So I think, to answer your question, Daniel, it's a value proposition piece, but again, it's been underpinned by the legislation that
Mm-hmm.
protects it. So
Mm-hmm.
putting a patent in place, but you can't patent an open AI
No.
model. So and a
No.
lot of people are building their value off
Yep.
these things. So I think,
Yep.
again, how do you interface to the world, and
Yeah.
it makes me think of, there's a book, Blue Ocean Strategies. I'm not
Yes,
sure if you've
yes,
read it.
yes.
Yeah. So
I
like,
mean, when I entered the space, it was fully blue ocean. Again, we were the only players creating a note taker for the financial advisor space. I can tell you right now, we have about 20 people copying us in the span of 2 years. Right? It's gone from blue to red in the business time scale instantly, immediately.
instantly.
Right? And so I think this is a question that everyone's going to have to grapple with and debate with, right? And I think there's a supply side issue, right? Because of AI, it's creating um, a push in the market for big tech companies to push out their engineers, and so there's a glut of engineers in the open market that now need things to do. And combine that with the vast sums of money from the private equity and venture capital market, it's created this firestorm of all the laid off engineers just starting AI companies. Right now, that was step one, phase one. Now I think we're starting to enter into phase two, which is interesting, which is okay, now that there's so much competition in the market, the initial insane valuations that the venture capital and private equity market has propped up, I don't think are going to see fruition, right? And so the valuations are going to start tanking. And so we're going to start to see, I think, a lot of these zombie unicorns start to just die. And then what happens, right? And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting question of how to build a sustainable business in this environment. And I don't think you can build a hyper scalable company um, just purely based on AI because it'll get copied immediately. And you're mentioning legislation and patent and copyright. It's not going to move fast enough to keep up with AI. And so, yeah, I think that's the answer.
I think you're right, and that's that's probably going to terrify some people when they sit down to think about it. I think if I look at the play, like the market is cornered already. You've got Microsoft, who've got the OpenAI umbrella in, so we could almost call them the two. You've got Google, and then I think
Mm-hmm.
the dark horse here that's going to overtake everyone. You've got Elon
Mm,
Musk, XAI. Like, he has built the entire stack,
yeah.
and he's built it very, very quickly.
Yes.
He
And in
owns every
recent
part of it.
benchmarks, right? And in
Yeah.
recent benchmarks, Grok has been outperforming all the other models out of the blue. It was very insane to see. Not only that, Meta has just spent millions and millions of dollars poaching talent from all the other companies, right? So, who knows what Meta's going to come up with? Like you mentioned, Google, and then some of the older name players, right? Anthropic, is still out there. And so, even at the base foundation level, my guess on how this thing is going to end up playing out is I think AI is going to become a commodity.
Yeah, I think it is, and what that actually means is yet to be, I think, decided. Um, but no, that's been a fascinating angle, Daniel. I do have to ask. When I was amused when I was looking at your educational background,
Sure.
your study of genetics mixed with the technology space and all of that. Can you give me some insight into how that came along? And do you know, I'm seeing more of this in the AI space, that people are
Mm.
studying genetics and plants and biology to see how things mimic so they can replicate it back into the technologies. I know it's been a
Yeah.
concept for years, but when you see the two beside each other, it jars.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wish I had some fancy story to tell you. It's kind of not that interesting, to be honest. I mean, of course, bioinformatics has been a thing for a very long time, right? And so using computational math to generate out, genetic sequencing, things like that for agribusiness and gene editing for gene therapy, things like that. That's been, kind of in the water for a very, very long time, now powered by AI. But realistically, that's not really why I did it. The boring, honest answer is both of my parents have PhDs in the sciences, and so I felt like I should study some science, and I like genetics the best, so that's what I ended up doing. But as you can see through my master's, it's I've not pursued that line of study. It's been mostly in the economics and the kind of the AI machine learning space instead.
I have to ask then. So that explains that one. It wasn't a fascinatingly obscure life choice that you made and then pivoted back in.
Yeah.
I have to ask then, Daniel. So you've started out your your journey in the financial industry. You're now in the technology sector.
Hmm.
You know, if you were to look back 10 years,
Mm.
is there some advice you'd give yourself to not fall into those pitfalls that you did, or you
Oh
know
man.
some of those thorny ones. I know I have plenty of advice to give young Francis, but not sure if you
Sure.
would have listened. You know.
I You're exactly right. I don't know if I would have listened to myself 10 years ago. I think so. I started coding when I was in elementary school, right? And I quickly realized by high school I hated debugging, which is why I never pursued computer science as kind of my course of study. If I were to go back, I probably would have told myself, just knuckle through it, because I think I could be doing a lot more interesting things, even in the current space right now, if I had just muscled through that initial grind, and maybe tell myself, hey, guess what? In 10 years there'll be AI that can help you debug, so don't worry about it and just go through it. But again, I don't know if I would have listened, so who knows?
Yeah, code. It takes a certain
Yeah,
sort of love for the world to sit in front of a computer all day and write lines of code and try
yeah.
and figure out then why it won't work after spending half the day half the
Yeah,
day
it
writing it.
was it was in half a day of debugging, and I was in high school. I wasn't the best coder, right? And so it was like, I think it was some logic error of like less than needed to be a less than or equals to. And, I had reams of paper I was writing down, tracking the variables, and so, yeah, that was not very much fun.
I must get your
Mhm.
your thoughts. So I'm not sure if you saw the MIT study a couple of weeks back on cognitive decline through persistent use of GPTs. I was discussing this with some other guests on the show, um, and we're seeing all sorts of funny stuff. The bad side of AI, where
Yeah.
it's my therapist told me go do harm and etc. But I
Hmm.
found the cognitive decline quite interesting, and it kind of reminds me of when you used to know your friend's phone number and now it's just his name. Do you think we're going to have a problem actually in the short term, in the next 5 to 10 years, where people are not applying critical thinking and that stage two part of the brain to get those neurons firing and really try and problem solve? Are we just going to have people writing prompts and consuming the output?
Yeah, it might surprise maybe you and your listeners to hear this, but I'm a bit of a Luddite. I don't like technology all that much, to be honest with you. And I am of the camp that I think a lot of technology does a lot of harm, especially if it's just used without thinking, right? Um, I think the world has still yet to grapple with the fallout from even just social media being ubiquitous, right? Kids that are growing up in the social media age are now just like to enter the workforce, and I think a lot of people are realizing what damage that's done. And now we're introducing AI, and we haven't even fully grasped how to deal with the fallout of social media. So how are we going to deal with this AI thing? The issue I think is, this goes back to the old, middle school question: why do we need to learn arithmetic? And the school teacher answer back then was, oh, you're not going to have a calculator with you all the time. Obviously, that was very wrong. We have cell phones in our pockets now with much more computing power than a simple calculator. But I think what that answer isn't covering is you need to be able to do basic arithmetic in your head so that you can understand the next concepts, right? The next concepts are not available to you unless you have it so down pat that you can just rattle off arithmetic, right? If you're needing to consult with a calculator for every step of arithmetic, you're not going to get algebra, right? And so I think that's kind of the issue that AI will pose. It's not so much that, hey, we're lacking this specific function, and that part degrades because of the use of AI, because we're offloading our cognitive load to AI. I think the real damage is in the gray matter thinking, right? The connectivity, the synergistic thinking between different disciplines. We're going to start to lose that because we can't hold multiple concepts in our head at once, right? Because we're offloading all the cognitive load to AI. And so I do think there is a fallout. I don't think it's that simplistic as, oh, we can't memorize people's phone numbers anymore. It's what comes next, right? I don't think we're going to develop the next thing if everyone is just offloading it all that way.
People are lazy by nature. We,
Of
we like
course.
we like convenience. So
Yes.
that's why we got rid of horses and got cars, and made the cars
Yeah.
faster and
Yeah.
safer, and
Yeah.
air travel and convenience food, and then we all got fat. So I think as technology has accelerated astronomically over the last 25 or so years, um that convenience has now come to the point where we don't actually need to think for ourselves anymore. We don't need to solve the problem because some other thing will do it for us. And I worry, and I think this is where your moat gets protected. It's the
Mm,
innovators that can see past the
mhm,
same as everyone
mm,
else that will build value in that value proposition. Because
mhm,
and I think Mark Cuban touched on this. In the next 3 years, disinformation and misinformation will be so prevalent that people will crave face to face human interactions. And I actually discussed this on with a previous guest as well, and we're both agreed in that one that when you can't trust your eyes, you can't trust your ears. The only thing that's left then is physical presence. It's the world we live in, the physical space past the screens. So I do think we're kind of sleepwalking into an age of the unknown, and whether that's a good thing or a really bad thing, I don't think it's going to take too long to figure that out. But I think by the time
mm.
we figure it out, if it's a bad thing, it's going to be probably too late.
I don't know if we'll figure it out too quick. It's the issue, right? I mean, even with social media, it's social media has been a interesting case study in tech adoption, right? The theory was kids growing up from the cradle using technology are going to be a lot more technologically savvy, and that just has not borne out, right? Because UI UX has become so user friendly. Um, Actually, I think my generation has become the most technically savvy because we were introduced to computers and computing at a young age, but it wasn't so commoditized that it was so easy to get into. Like we had to figure things out from the ground up. Kids nowadays that have been growing up in a very kind of cell phone UI space don't really know how the technology works. And one of the kind of the jarring examples I've heard from a person tutoring a kid in school was the tutor asked the student, "Hey, can you send me a copy of your homework and we can go over it together?" And the student said, "Oh, you just need to click on the folder and access my file." And the folder was in the school's intranet. And so, of course, an outsider couldn't access it, but the student just couldn't understand that there was different nets available because it was all connected for him, right? Just things like that. And so, it's been a case of do as I say, or do it, don't do as I say, do as I do kind of thing. So if you watch all of the tech titans in the world, they don't let their kids use social media, right? Right. And so, you're saying that, oh, this is like the moat for the innovators. Don't trust the innovators. They're in it for profit. Don't trust me, right? We're in it for profit. Um, and so, like, Zuckerberg doesn't let his kids, or none of the big tech people let their kids use social media from a young age because they know it's harmful, right? And so I think it'll be the same thing with AI. It's like, watch very carefully who or what the people creating this technology are actually doing with their loved ones, because that should tell you what they actually think about the product instead of just pitching it to you.
Yeah, and that's a terrifying prospect when you realize it. I often go back to that one. These guys aren't letting their kids use this stuff for a reason because they know the impact it's having in terms of their communication skills and their ability to articulate. It terrifies me when I go into a room full of kids and none of them are talking, and there's
Yeah.
messages just flying around in a circle, and there's
Yeah.
the odd giggle, and I'm going,
Yep.
guys, here's a ball, go outside, kick it around.
I mean, I'm kind of a young millennial. I don't really want to do the stupid generation war thing, but have you heard of the Gen Z stare?
I haven't, but you're going to tell me.
It's because of the lack of face-to-face interaction. Uh, I have not personally experienced this myself, but I've heard from other folks who are in management when they're hiring Gen Z people, they ask them a question, they just kind of get like a stare back and they don't really respond. So I think the idea of going back to face to face is appealing for the people that grew up pre ubiquitous technology. I don't know if that's going to be the case for future generation Gen Alpha. Even it's like they're just so not used to the face to face. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
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 very
going to pose
unsettling.
an interesting problem. Yeah, it's definitely. I don't actually want to think about it.
I mean, look, to blame my generation, millennials too, right? Like we have the stupid fear of picking up the phone and calling. Like I think that started with us, where it's just like just call them. It's like, no, no, I want to send them a message. It's like, just pick up the phone and call them, and I think that trend started with us, and it's kind of accelerated to like we just had a fear of phone calls. I think a lot of the younger generation now is having a fear of face to face, and where does it go from there? I have no idea.
And I think you come back to my generation. We used to have to ring our friends, talk to the mommy or daddy first, get
Oh
an
yeah,
interrogation, and
right. Why are you calling? Who
and
are
and then
you?
and then there was the man in the middle attack. I think I've talked before. Your friend had come on the phone, and you go, "Hey, how are you going?" You hear the mammy would have the phone to her ear upstairs eavesdropping. So it's we've come on a lot. We've come on a lot now, and you've got Signal and encrypted apps and messaging, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's
I mean,
it's a whole
previously
new world.
it was turn off the internet. I can't, receive a phone call, and now it's too much power from.
Too
Yeah,
much power. Daniel,
yeah,
look, it's been a great conversation. Lots of insightful pieces there, to take away. Specifically, your part around the mode, and how do you protect the innovative idea that you have today? Because someone could just steal it tomorrow with artificial intelligence. That definitely is that's a keen takeaway for myself. Now I'll have to mull that over to this evening, and think about it a bit
yeah,
more. But appreciate having you on, and I hope you have a great day.
yeah. Me too. Enjoyed my time here.
Thank you.